Hello, welcome to another Talk Wildlife interview, and today I'm going to be talking to someone who's going to shed light on giraffes. And up until very recently, there was actually only thought to be one species of giraffe. So not only are we going to find out that that's not the case, we're going to find out about a sort of recent development in the giraffe world that certainly excited me. But we're going to keep that towards the end of the interview, just so that I can keep you watching. But it's worth waiting for. Right, so I have Michael Brown. Now I'm going to read this because it's a long one. There's a lot of biologies in it. So Michael Brown is a Conservation Science Fellow of Giraffe Conservation Foundation and the Smithsonian Conservation Biological Institute.
Perfect.
Is that right? Brilliant.
Yes, great. Thanks, Alan. It's awesome to be with you this morning. It's really wonderful to chat with you.
Thank you very much for your time, because I do like a giraffe. And this is one interview I'm really looking forward to. So that being said, we're going to go straight into it. So what I want to do, I am going to share screen because you've sent me some brilliant slides, and I'm going to share them so people can see what we're talking about. There's also some amazing video footage in here, which really shows giraffes off very well. So again, that's a teaser for you to keep watching. All right. You start off with a cute picture, and how can people not stay watching?
Yeah, right.
So what we'll do is we'll come on and talk a little bit about the work of the Giraffe Conservation Foundation a bit later on in the slides. But what I want to start off with is this slide. And this slide basically depicts the interaction of sort of humans and giraffes. And clearly, this is a very old drawing. So could you give us a little bit of background about this? But first of all, can you start off just telling us a little bit about the evolution of the giraffe? So where did it come from, and where does it sit in the classification?
Sure. Well, you touched on it brilliantly at the beginning of how exciting giraffe are, and I'm certainly fascinated by them. As you are, but it turns out this isn't unique in sort of human history. People have long been fascinated with these spectacular creatures. This is from Twyfelfontein in Namibia, some art on giraffe, that predates Christ. This is thousands of years old, and this fascination with this incredibly unique animal is something that's very long-standing in human history. And it's really not hard to imagine why. They're extraordinarily captivating. But giraffe, as a taxa, are sort of a unique member. They're of the family Giraffidae currently, which consists of the modern day giraffes, which we'll talk a little bit about later, and also the okapi, which is this large, it looks like almost like a mix between a giraffe and a zebra, and it inhabits the dense rainforests of Central Africa. Giraffidae, though the extant giraffe kind of arose about 1 million years ago, the Giraffidae family as a whole is really quite interesting. If you get a chance to look at it in depth, there's some really cool animals that were of that family that are no longer in existence. There was a moose-sized giraffe called the Chivatherium, which had almost palmate ossicones, ossicones being the horn-like protuberances on the giraffe skull. They were smaller, like deer-sized giraffe. But the current giraffe, as we know it now, sort of arose about 1 million years ago, and is spread across all of sub-Saharan Africa at the moment, with some subtle variations in between some of the areas. And like I said, we'll explore that a bit more. But the evolutionary history is really fascinating, and it's given rise to this incredibly unique and special animal.
Yeah, and I think I remember reading a book about John Gould, and it starts off actually with him being invited to the Rothschilds' manor because they want him to stuff a giraffe. And I thought, yeah, right, okay, I can imagine. This guy had probably never seen a giraffe before, and the first thing he's got to do is stuff one, but such is life. Right, so let's move on now to a little bit about the sort of the background sort of biology to a giraffe, because it's endlessly fascinating, giraffes, and you don't realize it until you actually start thinking about it. So first of all, if you just describe, I mean, obviously sexual dimorphism between the male and the female. So if you just describe that for a start.
Right. Well, one of the most captivating things about the giraffe, one of the things that sort of smacks you in the face when you first see it is its unique stature. I mean, it's the largest mammal, the largest animal on walking the earth, and totally unique. There's nothing else like it. Obviously, one of the giraffe's defining characteristic is its long neck, which is comprised of the same number of cervical vertebrae as you or I have. There's just a lot bigger. And then the question comes from this long neck: what is the purpose? How does something like this arise? And there's a number of competing hypotheses as to why giraffes do have long necks, which we can talk about a little bit later. But that's just one of the more interesting characteristics of them. Right here, we have this slide as an example of just how big giraffes are. There's an incredible sexual dimorphism, first of all. You can see on the right in this image, there's a female. On the left, it's a male. They're both quite large, but the males can, the largest males can reach in excess of 20 feet. And you'll have to forgive me, I'm American, so I use my strange units.
That's fine.
But yeah, so they're quite large animals, and a lot of that's attributed to their very unique and interesting neck.
And let's talk while we're on this picture. Let's just talk for a second about some of the biology. So here we've got a giraffe, and it's been mentioned on sort of some TV programs. But first of all, you've got this long neck. So when it goes to drink, the only way it can drink is by splaying its legs and bringing its head forward. Now, we all know what happens when we've been sat a while and we stand up really quickly and we get a blood rush to the head and, we get a bit dizzy. So just talk us very briefly through what is happening internally for this giraffe not to pass out every time it goes to drink some water.
Yeah, giraffes have some incredible characteristics that sort of make this interesting, unique stature possible. One of which, as you described, how do we deal with blood getting up to this head and blood trickling down, and to prevent giraffe from having that situation where they'd pass out every time they drank, they actually have this very complicated network of blood vessels in their head that sort of, it's called the rete mirabile. It sort of works to percolate and sort of hold the blood there so it doesn't immediately rush out, causing them to pass out, which is really cool. They also have incredibly strong hearts and very tight skin that increase the blood pressure, and some valves in some of their blood vessels as well to prevent backwards flow of blood.
Yeah, because again, that was going to be another question. You've obviously got the heart pretty central there, and then you've got this long neck and the long legs. So you've talked about the heart. With regards to the legs, I suppose I could liken it to somebody that suffers from varicose veins wearing tight socks.
Exactly.
For it to be able to pump, and that's the same with giraffes' legs, isn't it? The skin is really tight around the leg so that the blood will basically be able to. This is me doing blood pumping, so that the blood is able to then get sort of helped, if you like, to sort of go back up.
Exactly. So giraffe, they're so unique, and they face some very interesting physiological challenges that we as humans typically don't have to deal with, that in other environments, let's say humans traveling in space, there's some potential adaptations, particularly for issues like blood flow and low gravity environments, where giraffes actually provide a really cool template for people to study and take some of the ideas and helping humans navigate these low gravity environments in space. So we can learn a lot even about space travel from things like giraffe.
Right. This is a great piece of footage. When you look at a giraffe, and we'll look at a giraffe. So you look at a giraffe, and all right, maybe not the one on the left, because the one on the left does look a bit of a brute, and I wouldn't want to take him on. But
no.
You look at the one on the right, which, the female, and they look quite delicate, and they almost look like they're off balance. They almost look that if they do swing that head too much, they'd fall over. But recently we saw on a David Attenborough program a sort of a real fight between a couple of males, and you've provided us some excellent footage, which hopefully now will play out. If you can tell us what's happening here.
Sure. Well, these are some younger male giraffe. These are young adult males. in Kadepo Valley National Park, Uganda, and we can see them engaging in behavior we call necking. So we talked about the giraffe neck and what purposes a neck like that might have. Obviously, there's the the foraging hypothesis, right? It's being able to reach the leaves on taller trees, and vigilance as well. If you're taller, you can scan the savannas a bit more. But one of the other hypotheses that is getting a bit more traction, and one we think might be the cause for the rise of the giraffe neck is what we call the necks for sex hypothesis. So male giraffes have a very interesting way of fighting. You saw it in the David Attenborough documentary, and you have an example of them sort of trying that out here, where they'll actually line up next to each other and swing their heads like a big mace. And obviously, in a situation like that, the heavier head and the longer neck will give you the greatest force to hit your opponents. So giraffe are really one of the only animals that fight like this. And in that situation, having a longer neck and a heavier head, particularly in these males, where they have these, in some types of giraffe, they have these massive ossicones. You can see them on these giraffes, where they just get this incredible accumulation of bone on their skull just to make it the most formidable club they can. And when they get going, as you saw in that David Attenborough video, when they really get into it, it can be really aggressive and pretty violent.
Yeah, I mean, the ligaments in the neck and the muscle in their neck, because it does look quite a delicate thing, the neck, but they must have incredible ligaments and muscles in the neck to be able to, number one, to swing it the way they do, but to actually use their head as a club like they are. It's, again, anatomy of giraffe is just outstanding.
It's really interesting. We talk a little bit about the sexual dimorphism there. For that, really males are the ones that are benefiting in the necks for sex hypothesis by the longer neck and the heavier neck, whereas females in that situation, they're not fighting the same way as males do. So actually, one of the things we do see is females, they'll continue to, their necks will continue to grow and their skulls will continue to ossify. Some studies say until about they're 6 or 7 years old. Males will continue to accumulate bone on their head and their necks will get thicker. So the biggest, oldest males have the heaviest heads and the thickest necks, and that's typically as they get a little bit older, they become more dominant in this complicated social hierarchy that male giraffes seem to have.
Yeah, and then this, I don't know how you got this footage. You must have been up a tree, but and a really nice piece of footage of the giraffe eating. So if you go through this for us. Sure.
Well, giraffe also are really interesting in that they're sort of obligate browsers, meaning they eat primarily leaves, shoots, seeds, flowers off of woody vegetation, off of trees, which in a lot of these African savannas means they're contesting with these thorns. You've been to oversee these animals in the wild, Alan, and I'm sure you can attest. A lot of these trees out there are very well protected. They don't particularly like being eaten, so to speak. So there's evolutionary mechanisms, plant defenses that make them less easily foraged upon. And so the giraffe have come up with these sort of this evolutionary arms race, as you will, between herbivore and plant, where giraffe have these incredibly dexterous lips and tongues so that they can navigate these thorny woody vegetation. Interestingly, giraffe are also the largest ruminants in the world, kind of like a cow or a goat, in which they have a very unique digestive system, which allow them to take energy out of these woody vegetation that they consume.
Right, now, you see, you shouldn't have mentioned that because that's taken me off on a tangent a bit, but I'm going to...
Let's go. Let's talk. We can nerd out on ruminants all day long.
So a ruminant, so we know what a ruminant does. A ruminant eats its food, it then regurgitates its food and rechews it and swallows it. Mm-hmm. Right. That's okay if you're a cow, because your head to your stomach is not that far. What mechanism has a giraffe got that can enable it to basically regurgitate a mouthful of food?
It's incredible to see in the field. You can actually, that's called a bolus. You can actually see the lump go up, and it's the same sort of mechanisms you would see in like a goat, but they're just more pronounced, just stronger. And it's just a remarkable thing to see this bolus, this chewed up cud go up, and then they work on it and then swallow it back down again. Ruminants in general is just an incredible evolutionary sort of mechanism. It's a symbiotic relationship between their gut microbiome and the host, as a giraffe is, allowing these little bugs in their stomach to do a lot of digestive work, so that giraffes can derive the energy, which essentially comes from the sun and carbon dioxide makes these plants. It's just this incredibly beautiful poetic process. And I don't think people appreciate the poetry of rumination as much as maybe they should. So think about that next time you see a cow out on the farm. There's just some beautiful things going on inside that animal.
I'll look for it now. I'd rather look for it in a giraffe, though.
Me too. Me too.
Can I just? Is this an acacia tree?
Yeah, that is Acacia senegal. It's a type of acacia tree in Murchison Falls National Park. This particular type of acacia tree is interesting. You can sort of see it with the close up there, but they have these hooked spines. We would have to occasionally pick leaves off of some of these trees to do some nutritional studies. And so you see a giraffe working on that tree pretty hard, pretty quickly. To get what that giraffe would get in 30 seconds, it would take me like 5 minutes of like picking in between each of those trees, and my hand would come out all cut up and bloodied because of the hooked spines on there are just, they're really gnarly and they get into you rather quickly. So I have a much deeper appreciation for how a giraffe like that navigates such a spiny tree.
Yeah, me too. I once ran into, because I grew up in South Africa, and I ran a bit close to an acacia. It won't have been this species. It's one of the long white thorns on it.
Sure.
And I ran a bit close, and one hit me in the head, and sort of, oh my, let's not go there.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah. So you do get an appreciation for the skill and dexterity of giraffe foraging when you get a firsthand look at some of these really gnarly thorns and spines on some of these trees. And in addition to that, which is kind of cool, a lot of these trees have chemical defenses too. There's lots of toxins and chemical nasties. So giraffe kind of have to navigate this really interesting foraging landscape as they're picking between different types of trees that have different types of chemicals in different levels, and there may be thresholds of certain chemicals that they can sort of consume over the span of a day. And so it's this very, we think is a rather complicated foraging calculus, where they have to sort of navigate these environments and eat sort of a diversity of different plant species so that they can meet their nutritional requirements and their energetic requirements while not exceeding sort of these toxic thresholds or these secondary plant metabolites. So it's really cool. It's a fun thing to think about, and sort of emphasizes the complexity of these ecosystems and how diversity in some of these plant species is really important for supporting a healthy ecosystem.
And you mentioned the poisons there. So do they, because some animals, well, some parrots and various other animals will sort of go to a salt lick or somewhere where there's mud and eat that to try and counter the poisons. Does the giraffe do the same thing?
Yeah, they do. So geophagia, eating of the earth, is something we commonly see in giraffe, and there's a number of reasons people think that might arise. One of which being sort of supplementing some of the nutrients or vitamins that they don't get in the food. But another, as you suggest, is sort of a detoxification. They can eat some of these soils, some of these clays and salts, and that might help to detoxify some of the nasties that they're getting out of the plants. Right.
And if it's not enough that plants are trying to kill adult giraffes, this is a baby giraffe. I thought I'd go to the slide early so I could give people the arm.
Sure.
But this is a baby giraffe, and we'll play it in a second. But the plants and trees are trying to kill them. The mother's trying to kill it as well, because it doesn't sit down, does it, to give birth? It just lets it fall out. So it's falling, what, about 9 feet? Is it?
About 6 feet. Yeah, it's a rude awakening. Welcome to the world, baby giraffe. And this particular giraffe, I was fortunate enough to actually watch be born in the wild. This is also in Murchison Falls National Park, Uganda. This giraffe is fresh out of the oven, as it were, and those are actually its first steps. So I watched it plop, and then within an hour, it was a couple tries. I edited it for the highlight, but within an hour it's up and walking. But after a 6 foot plop to the world. Welcome to the world, baby giraffe.
So once it's dropped, that was timing. Once it's dropped, how long does it actually take to then come around and recover from that? Because it must be a real shock to the system.
Yeah, well, when this particular giraffe, when it fell down, it sort of just lays there in a blob of goo. I mean, that's quite a traumatic entry into the world. But like I said, within an hour, it was up and walking with its mother, which is really incredible. As you might imagine, it's a 6-foot animal coming out pretty much into the world, and it's very vulnerable at this stage. There's lots of things out in that environment that would love to nab a baby giraffe. It's a pretty easy 6-foot meal. And so it's really to the giraffe's advantage to get up and moving and stick with his mother as quickly as possible.
Yeah, yeah.
Giraffe, or really quickly though, I'd love to touch on the reproductive.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
This is a really cool thing about giraffe. With a lot of other ungulates in these seasonal environments, there's breeding seasons. With giraffe, they're not. They're aseasonal, asynchronous breeders. So they breed throughout the year, any time of the year. And so anytime you go out into some of these environments, there's a chance you can see baby giraffe, which is really interesting for a number of reasons. In these seasonal environments, in the dry seasons in particular, sometimes the leaves on trees fall off and the nutrition sort of decreases. And so going in and having a baby in these times of energetic distress can be problematic for a lot of different animals. But for giraffe, they seem to figure out a way, which is really cool. And they have a digestive gestation period of roughly 15 months as well. So it's a long time to be carrying a baby like that.
Yeah, sorry, that wasn't me telling you to stop. That was me.
Yeah, I can take it. I
was going to try and play the video again just so that people could get another aha moment while you were talking. But anyway, it will move on. So those that were paying attention have probably already guessed what's coming next, which is, I mentioned right up front about, for a long time, there was only thought to be one species of giraffe. And I remember I actually read a paper when I was doing some research for Talk Wildlife in its old guise, because it used to just be articles rather than video. And I remember reading then, and it kind of been that long ago, that actually they just found that there's actually not just one species, that there are 4 species and a number of subspecies. And I think, if I remember rightly, the paper was from Giraffe Conservation Foundation, I'm sure it was, because they're at the forefront of this kind of research. So can you talk us through, first of all, how did they arrive at that? What went behind them going, right, okay, there isn't one, there's this, just so people can understand, and then talk us through some of the species and subspecies you found.
Sure. So the history of giraffe taxonomy is sort of a long one, in that you can sort of go to different populations in different areas and look at these giraffe, and they kind of look a little different, and there's subtle variations in how they might appear. And so people have long debated how to classify these. And taxonomy in and of itself is sort of a tricky field, in that even in the scientific community, there's no consensus as to what a species is. There's a lot of different ways to sort of I identify these different variations. And I mean, evolution is this fluid system, and we're trying to put boxes on this fluid system to categorize it so that it can make sense to us, but it doesn't necessarily work that way in nature. So people don't necessarily agree on those same ways of categorizing, which has made this an interesting debate. One of the cool things, though, is as you said, some of the recent studies suggest that some of the variations between these populations constitute enough of a difference for them to be considered different species. So some of my colleagues from the Giraffe Conservation Foundation actually went out to a bunch of these populations and collected tissue samples of giraffe and did some genetic analysis. A lot of the earlier efforts at categorizing giraffe were based on some other characteristics that may or may not be illustrative of actual differences between these. So when you look at it from a genetic perspective, there's enough difference between some of these populations in terms of some of their DNA structure. For instance, some giraffe are more different genetically than a grizzly bear and a polar bear. Right. So yeah, there's enough evidence there to suggest that no, there are actually indeed 4 species of giraffe. And if you look at this map, you can see them sort of outlined here. And it's really interesting to see how these 4 species overlapped with some of these physical barriers. The biogeography of giraffe is really, really interesting. So you have the northern giraffe up north of, in between the Sahara and the rainforests of Central Africa. You can see in Niger, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Sudan and Uganda. And then once you get into Kenya, Kenya is a really interesting case because you actually have an overlap of 3 separate species of giraffe, which is quite remarkable. You've got the northern giraffe, the reticulated giraffe, and the Maasai giraffe in southern Kenya. So for comparison, that's a country the size of the American state of Texas with 3 different species of giraffe in it, which is poses some very interesting questions as to how you can get that sort of evolutionary trajectory in such a small space. So trying to understand giraffe evolution and giraffe biogeography just from that East African perspective is a cool thought process. And then once you get a little further down south, you have the southern giraffe, which you can kind of break up into 2 separate subspecies, the Angolan and the South African giraffe.
Yeah, I think I've seen South African giraffe, so I've got a bit of work to do to see all of them. Right, so before we move on to talk about the species sort of a little bit more detail, I just want people to bear in mind the darker grey part of this map, which is the historical range in the 1700s. Now, right, that's a long time ago.
Yeah.
But we will be talking about the conservation status a little bit later on. So keep that in your mind, and then also the figures that we'll quote when we start talking about the state of the giraffe today. Right. So you've very kindly sent me a number of pictures of the different species and subspecies. So if you walk us through this, to be honest, when I first see that, I mean, that almost does look, I know when you look at a reticulated giraffe versus a South African giraffe, it's an obvious difference, but there's something about this, and I don't know what it is, but this also looks different to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this one's in an interesting posture. One of the reasons I'm including this next slide of the next series of images, when you look at that map, you can see it's a huge swath. There's like 21 different countries of where these giraffe actually inhabit. And that represents an incredible diversity of landscapes. And that's one of the other remarkable things about giraffe, is that you can find them in incredibly different landscapes, and they do quite well in these remarkably contrasting landscapes. So as we cycle through the next few images, just bear that in mind, because when you look at the background of these images, they're very, very different places, and yet giraffe can exist in all of them. So this is one. I'm sorry, go ahead.
And I was going to say, you just tell me when you want me to sort of walk through these, because obviously I don't want to go too fast or too slow for you.
Gotcha. So this one is a giraffe in the Canadian region of central Namibia, and you can see it's a pretty arid environment there. If we go to the next one, I think you'll see an even more. Oh, never mind. I get my slides out of order. No, go ahead. The next one. That will contrast a bit to this more mountainous savanna in northeastern Uganda. This is in Kidepo Valley National Park. So this one, these are northern giraffe of the Nubian variety, and you can see it's a bit more lush savanna type environment. If we go to the next one, this is the one I was talking about. This is in Etosha National Park, and it almost looks like this lunar landscape. This is the southern Angolan giraffe walking along Etosha salt pan there, which strikes a big contrast to the next one. These more wooded, closed canopy Acacia siberiana woodland in Murchison Falls National Park. I love the contrast between what we see here and what we saw in Etosha. It's really just very illustrative of the diversity of environments that you can find giraffe. The next one I think is one of my oh, there we go, the reticulated giraffe. This is in central Kenya, and they also have it's sort of this semi-arid bushland. So they're falling somewhere in between the rainfall gradient between the drier places of Namibia and the more wetter environments of northern Uganda. And then we go into the next one. This one's a special picture. This takes me back. This is a Maasai giraffe in Tanzania's Lake Banjara National Park, which is another one of those savanna type systems. So, I mean, we can see this diversity of giraffe, and we can see this diversity of giraffe environments. And because giraffe inhabit these very diverse environments, which have, diverse cultural context, diverse political context, humans around each of these environments have slightly different practices and beliefs. Trying to come up with conservation strategies, trying to come up with ways to understand and conserve giraffe in these diverse environments is something that's really quite challenging and requires some really deep understandings of the ecology, but also sort of the human context as well of these environments, because you can't conserve animals unless you can work with the people who live alongside those animals. So yeah, trying to come up with diverse approaches that are tailored to some of these diverse environments is one of the things that we focus at with the Giraffe Conservation Foundation.
Yeah, and we'll come on in a bit more detail as to some of the other work that you're doing in a moment. I just wanted, so if you look at that picture and then you look at that picture, and even to an extent that one, but certainly that one. So if you look at that one, and that one, I mean, certainly you can see differences in the patterns of, the markings on it. So yeah, when it comes down to, yeah, there's different species, there's visual clues there, but obviously you've done this through DNA testing. Right. Were there any physical, other than the patterns, were there any other physical adaptations that you saw that maybe showed how each individual giraffe from each individual region that you've talked about has sort of adapted to that particular environment, or anything other than that, any other physical elements to do with, maybe the horns that you mentioned or things like that?
Yeah, well, one of the striking things, as you mentioned, is the pelage, the coat patterns, and there do seem to be general trends across different populations. It's sometimes difficult to quantify, but yeah, you can look at a Maasai giraffe, and they typically have the more sort of jagged spots or rosettes, as opposed to the reticulated giraffe, which are much more sort of blocky. But there are potentially some other differences as well. If you look at sort of cranial morphology, particularly among adult males in some of these populations, there do seem to be some differences. It's working a bit more in depth about trying to figure out if those differences are significant enough to actually say they're very quantifiably different. But if you look at an adult male southern giraffe, for instance, versus an adult male northern giraffe, the northern giraffes typically seem to have much more exaggerated, pronounced ossicones. Historically, when giraffe taxonomy was in its earlier days, the northern giraffes, particularly the ones in Uganda, were sometimes referred to as the five-horn giraffe, because they actually have these protuberances that come out of the back of their head. So the male giraffes have the two primary ossicones and the median ossicone, that sort of horn in the middle of their forehead, and then they actually have these little nubbins behind the ears as well. And so even in the earlier days of giraffe taxonomy, people sort of identified these subtle differences in cranial morphology.
Sure. Right. So I mentioned sort of the map earlier on, and granted that was from the 1700s. This is from the IUCN Red List, which is basically the database of species worldwide, and whether they're classed as vulnerable. Unfortunately, some extinct, whether they're classed as least concerned. But basically, they were still listing just the one giraffe. They have, I'd noticed yesterday, listed some of the subspecies. But what I want to talk to you about here is not the 1700s, but the last 3 decades. Because over the last 3 decades, we've lost 30%, is that right, of all giraffe species?
About, yeah.
Right, okay, so that's clearly worrying. And I think what tends to happen is animals outside of the likes of sort of lions and tigers and elephants tend to go under the radar. So something like a giraffe, which we've already talked about, their place in human history, that, they've been part of that for many, many years. It's sort of gone under the radar a little bit, that these, super species, because I mean, look, I'd rather see a giraffe than a lion, to be honest. But anyway, but they now are in such dire straits. So what has driven that, and why such a rapid decline?
Yeah, well, my colleagues at the Giraffe Conservation Foundation sort of dubbed it the silent extinction, in that it is remarkable that such a charismatic animal, one that captivates the imagination of so many people, could sort of face this decline, and it wasn't quite acknowledged until we really put some numbers to it. In this IUCN assessment of the group of which I helped to co-author this report back a couple years ago. It is important to note that this particular assessment is of giraffe as a whole across all of Africa. And by our best estimates, currently there's roughly 111,000 giraffe remaining, which is significantly less than, for instance, the number of elephants remaining in Africa. So this is not to say we shouldn't be concerned about elephants as well, but also maybe pay attention to this decline of giraffe. We saw on the map giraffe are inhabiting these large and diverse landscapes, and so trying to figure out and pinpoint the exact causes of decline are sometimes difficult when we think about it at a general level. Mostly though, we can attribute a lot of this to habitat loss and fragmentation. There's just a lot more people and a lot less land for animals on some of these landscapes, and that's true for a lot of different species across these particular landscapes. So coming up with diverse and creative approaches to promote coexistence is obviously something we're interested in as conservation ecologists. In some areas, civil unrest has led to increased illegal hunting and poaching of wildlife, and we've seen that in some populations being totally extirpated, particularly in areas where there's been war and conflict, and people obviously, when there's food insecurity, the giraffe's a big potential source of food. So a giraffe can have shown to be a palatable war fodder, as it were.
Yeah. So if the Red List was republished this year and it was completely bang up to date, of the 4 species, which one is sort of the most in trouble?
The northern giraffe. The northern, and that's largely, due to these small fragmented populations, and because it particularly had faced some areas of civil unrest and conflict. The northern giraffe, some of these subspecies, the Nubian giraffe, for instance, would be critically endangered if you applied IUCN categorization to their current conservation status. So yeah, that's one of the reasons taxonomy does matter. If we're binning these animals as a whole species, it doesn't necessarily tell the complete story. Some places, like the northern giraffe populations, have seen some very scary declines and some potentially problematic trends, as opposed to maybe the southern giraffe, which has seen some pretty remarkable conservation gains. So that's another sort of interesting nuance in giraffe conservation and ecology. You can't really paint a whole picture of giraffe ecology and conservation across Africa. Really having some of these categorizations sort of rooted in solid taxonomy can help us to inform how we understand giraffe, how we understand their abundance and distribution trends, and ultimately how we come up with effective strategies to conserve them.
Which brings us very nicely onto the work of your organization, or the organization you work with. So here we have a picture, and this is sort of forms part of the monitoring that that you guys are doing. And I'm going to move on to the next one, because it seems like they all have names. So explain.
Yeah, so we at the Giraffe Conservation Foundation are committed to quality science informing creative conservation. And so we root a lot of our initiatives in evidence and data and the best available science at the time. And so we do a number of different projects in a number of different populations across Africa. But giraffe are really helpful in some regards, in that they make counting them a little bit easier, in that they all sort of have their own name tag. So every giraffe has a unique spot pattern, like a human fingerprint. And we can use digital photographs of these individual giraffes in association with pattern recognition software to actually identify these giraffe, make sure we don't double count them, and we can go out and take photographs of essentially all the giraffe we see in a population, run them through this program, and through some ecological modeling can figure out how many giraffe are out there, if the populations are growing, and then we can sort of overlay them on different landscape features to identify particular, habitats that are of significant concern for giraffe. So yeah, the photographic surveys are actually really important for helping us to understand giraffe abundance and distribution trends. And we do this in a number of different populations across Africa. For instance, in Uganda, we have a database of just about of most of the giraffe in the country. We have them all identified so that we can monitor these trends over time.
And you should be able to tell me what species of giraffe that is, because if I can see rightly, that looks like the one that you were describing earlier with the 5 horns. That
is, yep. Those are 3 male giraffe or a few more if you count the rumps in Murchison Falls National Park, Uganda, which would make them of the Nubian variety of the northern species.
Yeah, and what about the 2-tailed giraffe at the end here? Is that a new species?
That might be new to science, I think.
Right. Okay. So there's one way of identifying individual giraffes is one way of actually working out Here's another one. Very attractive. Here we have the equivalent to what, as a birder in the past, I've done some ringing and tracking. I'm not a ringer. I've just been fortunate enough to be invited along to do it. And here we have what looked like GPS tags on the horns. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. Yeah, these are some of our Ossico mounted GPS units. So with the Giraffe Conservation Foundation and a number of our partners, Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute being one of them, we've sort of embarked on one of the largest giraffe tracking studies ever conducted. We've deployed over 200 GPS units on giraffe in over 8 different countries, sort of spanning that incredible diversity of habitats, and are collecting location data. Each one of those GPS units is about the size of a deck of cards. They're solar charged and they're connected to the Iridium satellite network. So they're beaming up locations of these giraffe. We record them every hour and they transmit to the satellite network. And so now I can, on my laptop here, I can pull up a map of Africa and show where all these giraffe currently are, which gives us some incredible information. As you see here, this is again in Uganda. We can see this is a number of giraffes on the same landscape. Look at the density of these points and how giraffe are moving across this landscape. And if we overlay that on maps of habitat type or bush density or distance to water, we can figure out what are the conditions, what are the environments that some of these giraffe prefer, and then we can use that understanding to effectively conserve those particular resources and make sure that giraffe have access to them so that they can live happy, healthy lives. Additionally, we work with our partners in these landscapes and share this information in real time so that rangers and managers there can see where these giraffe are and can maybe target some of their patrols to conserve some of these animals as well. So this type of information, it's incredible. The volume we have millions and millions of points of giraffe locations, and then working to analyze them with satellite imagery and some of these geographic information systems is something that can tell us quite a bit about giraffe ecology and what we need to know to conserve them effectively.
And just a quick question before we move on is how robust are those geolocators on the male's head? Because when he decides he wants to have a fight, that's going to be quite vulnerable.
Yes, and they are. So we don't tag males as much anymore for that exact reason. We want to make sure that we're working in the best interest of the animal. Obviously, animal welfare is paramount, and so we don't want to do anything that might jeopardize normal behavior or threaten the health of the animal.
Sure. Right, and then something else. This giraffe must be thinking, now hang on, what is going on here? I am actually moving, but I'm not moving my legs. In fact, before we go on to that, and I might have warned you at the beginning, and I might go off on a tangent. I'm just a slight tangent, because I've just mentioned giraffes walking, just tell us, because this is a really weird thing in giraffes, and I think, if I remember rightly, it's actually common only to giraffe species, is that they walk and run in a different way by moving their legs in a different way. Is that right?
Yeah, oh, goodness. So the terminology. So if you look at a giraffe as it's walking, it'll move one side and the other side, and then it's switches its gait pattern as it changes its speed. Which is, I mean, some animals do that as well, but just to watch them sort of almost float across the landscape, they don't really look like they're moving hardly at all. But when you try to drive your Land Cruiser up to them, take a photograph, you realize they're covering some ground quite quickly, it's just this beautiful grace with this incredible gait.
Yeah, and this one clearly feels like it's floating across the landscape. So I've been meaning to say it right the way through the presentation. If once you finish watching this interview, and finish watching the interview because we've got some extremely good stuff coming, go on to the YouTube channel of the Giraffe Foundation, because there is some amazing footage on there of how they go about translocating giraffes. And not just that, there's just some exceptional footage about their work. So highly recommend you go there, subscribe, and follow it, because it's amazing. Right, so tell us what's happening here.
Sure. So all the science we do, all the work we do is largely to inform conservation policy. So we work very closely with our partners on the ground in different range state governments and local communities to try to use the science to create actionable goals and strategies for giraffe conservation. And one of the effective tools that we've been pretty successful at using is conservation translocation. So particularly in areas where we know there were historically giraffe, you can go back in the literature and find that giraffe existed in these habitats and into relatively recent history, but it maybe have been extirpated by conflict or something like that. We can actually use conservation translocations as an effective strategy to reestablish populations in these areas that were once strongholds for giraffe. And we use our understanding of the ecology of the area, the population dynamics of source population. So we need to take giraffe essentially from some place and take them to another place. So all the information we have about population dynamics and habitat use and foraging ecology goes into an effective conservation translocation strategy. And I'll use again Uganda as an example of how this works, because we had some really good understandings of historical distribution of giraffe. We know that giraffe previously were very widely distributed across northern Uganda, but there were some periods of civil unrest in some areas that essentially had wiped out some of these populations. Sometimes as recently as 1996, we knew that there were some giraffe in some areas, and they were wiped out. Now Uganda's recovered from those periods, and these places are safe places, peaceful places, and they're still remarkably good giraffe habitat. And so the time has been right, particularly when some of the populations are growing as rapidly as they are, to sort of reestablish some of these populations of giraffe and reintroduce what was once a critical component of these vibrant ecosystems. And that's what we're doing right here. Taking some giraffe from one population, which is robust and growing, and either using them to reintroduce giraffe to an area where they previously were, or to augment maybe a smaller population that's kind of teetering on what we might think is a dangerous place to be for a population. And so it's really a remarkable operation to try and capture these giraffe and take them to these environments and sort of reintroduce this critical component to the ecology of the system.
Just again, a slight aside. It's still to do with the work that you guys are doing. In fact, first of all, I've got to ask, are them giraffes propped up in any way, or are they just balancing there?
No, they're just standing. It is, once they get in the trucks, their heads are popping out, and they just kind of take it all in.
I'd love to know what they're thinking.
Yeah, well, and this is a pretty rural setting. Sometimes when we're moving these giraffe, we're actually taking them through some pretty well-populated urban type environments. There's motorcycles going up and down the streets, and people in the corners waving to the giraffe, and they just seem to take it all in.
Amazing. And it's ironic that you should mention sort of population and people, because that was going to be my next question. Is there, so obviously we know there's a poaching issue with the likes of elephants, and we know that there's potentially they hunted for bushmeat giraffes. Is there a hunting issue? So does that cause issues in the community when you're taking a new giraffe in? Are they welcomed, or are they welcomed as bushmeat, or are they welcomed as a giraffe? Because I know a lot of local communities get very proud of the fact that they've then suddenly got this giraffe or elephant or whatever it is they're going to have to look after. What and how do you work with sort of people in the communities? What's their response to it? How do you work on that?
Yeah, that's obviously something very important. You can't just, take this animal and dump it in a landscape and not let the people know that there needs to be community buy-in for effective conservation strategy, right? I mean, these animals are sharing this landscape with these communities, and it would be totally unreasonable and totally unfair to put a burden on these communities without their engagement, without their involvement. And fortunately for us, giraffe are relatively good neighbors. With other animals like lions or elephants or buffalo, there's a much more concrete and visceral source of conflict. Lion predation on cattle, elephant crop raiding, that sort of thing. Giraffe are relatively good neighbors, and in our experiences, they've been welcomed by some of the communities. We recently had a translocation again in Uganda to a place called Pianupe Wildlife Reserve, which was the population where we had identified giraffe were there up until 1995. And so this is part of sort of the collective memory of these communities around this protected area. And in that particular instance, giraffe were sort of almost a totem animal for some of these local communities. So it actually had cultural significance as well as ecological significance as well. And so when we worked with the Ugandan Wildlife Authority to help reintroduce giraffe to this population, the community was incredibly proud of that particular moment. And they actually came up and yeah, they did a ceremony to welcome the giraffe into this community, which is obviously, I mean, that's great when you can have that cultural component and bring back an animal that was so significant to these local communities, and to play a small role in that reintroduction and is really a powerful feeling, and obviously a conservation success story when you can tick the ecological box and the social and the cultural box as well. It was a heartwarming thing to see.
And it's interesting because you mentioned culture there. Way back at the beginning of the interview, we saw the picture of the cave drawings that I think were done by the Sand People.
I'm not quite sure who. I don't want to get it wrong.
Yeah, I think it might be in the Sand People. But anyway, whoever it was, very good taste and very good art. But so seeing that, is there what part, if any, does the giraffe play in the culture of sort of Africans, basically? Because some animals play a massive part in their culture. Is the giraffe part of that?
Sure. I mean, Africa is an incredibly huge and diverse place in a number of different ways. And so it's difficult necessarily maybe to make broad generalizations about that. But again, I'll use the example of Pianupe Wildlife Reserve. You saw the cave paintings in Namibia. There were cave paintings of giraffe in that landscape as well. I mean, so they're this incredibly charismatic animal. They have a lot of symbolic meaning for different cultures, and people can identify them with certain ways. And that's really important, and maybe necessarily shouldn't be overlooked, sort of the cultural role that they play as icons of these landscapes, and help people connect with this incredibly beautiful landscape and these incredibly beautiful ecosystems. Just sort of a conduit for drawing attention and drawing love for these wild places. So they do. I mean, they show up in art and historic art all over Africa. I mean, there's paintings in Uganda and Namibia. I was just looking at some giraffe carvings and rocks in South Africa as well. So they show up in art, and it's just sort of a testament to how iconic they are, and certainly worth conserving.
Yeah, definitely. So this speaks for itself. So I think we'll just let this play. Now, it's worth saying that no cameras were harmed in the filming of this. The cameraman, on the other hand, I love that.
A necessary casualty. We sacrificed the GoPro to the cause.
It's brilliant. You couldn't have placed the camera in a worse place. That's absolutely fantastic.
So this is the release of a cohort of giraffe, and really it's sort of the feel-good moment. You can see how excited everyone is to see these giraffe leave that car. Certainly not the least of which the giraffe are excited to leave that car, as they sort of explore this new environment and work to create a future for giraffe in these places. So that's kind of one of a good culmination of how the science and how the community engagement and how the engagement of local partners can sort of culminate in this one particular moment of just sort of a beautiful thing to see for giraffe conservation.
Yeah, yeah. It is. I mean, it's great. Again, there's some fantastic footage on your YouTube channel that people should go and have a look at. And again, I played the last one twice, and then I purposely went to this. It might have seemed like I'd pressed the button at the wrong time. I hadn't. I did it on purpose because I wanted people to take this picture in. Because when I first saw it, I mean, unfortunately, I saw it as linked to the story that it related to. So I already knew what was coming. But when you first see it, you think, what is going on here? Is that giraffe really very far away? Or, is that, what? So I think over to you. You can tell us, this is the bit of news you've been waiting for, guys. This is incredible. Just when you thought you couldn't learn anything more about giraffes, over to you.
Sure. So with these photographic surveys that we do, we cover a lot of ground and we see a lot of giraffe. And some days we'll take hundreds of pictures of giraffe, and we identify them as individuals. And so in some of these surveys, one in Namibia and one in Uganda, we are going through these populations and looking at some of these individuals, and we noticed some things were interesting and unique about some of these giraffe, particularly when they're standing next to other ones. We start to take a closer look. We indeed found out that there are examples of dwarf giraffe in these particular populations. And so one of the reasons that Alan had reached out to me is that some of we recently published a study describing two dwarf giraffe, one in Namibia and one in Uganda. And the news has certainly captured people's imaginations. There's still so much to learn about giraffe because this is the first time we've actually documented this in the scientific literature.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm going to dwell there for just a second, just so people can take this in. That is a dwarf giraffe, right? And no matter how many times you tell your brain that that's not a baby giraffe, it's very hard for you to go, no, that is a dwarf giraffe. Then when we go on to here, this really, really does paint a picture of, what a dwarf giraffe looks like, because I was always going to cover part of the screen then and say, if you look at that, but of course, people are not going to see where my hand is. That's just because I'm mad. Right. If you look at those three, if you talk us through it, because it's obviously immediately apparent to people what's going on with the middle one. So if you can talk us through those.
Sure. So we, because we identify giraffe as individuals, we can actually reasonably, we can age them reasonably well. We know roughly how old they are based on their age when we first see them, or how big they are when we first see them. So all of these giraffe right here are subadult males. So they should roughly be the same proportions. But if we look at the one on the left, this is one sort of what you might expect for a giraffe in this particular population as a subadult male. And pay close attention to their legs and their limb proportions. The one in the middle is also subadult male from actually that same population in Uganda. But you'll notice that his radius and metacarpal, his leg bones, are much, much shorter than what we would expect for a subadult male in that population. And the one on the far right there is the one in Namibia as well, also with shorter leg bones and a slightly shorter compressed neck. And we did some cool digital photogrammetry where we can actually measure these dimensions of these limbs from digital photographs, and then do some statistics to compare them to what we would expect for giraffe of those ages. And yes, those limb proportions are significantly different, significantly shorter than what we would expect for giraffe of a similar age and sex class.
Right. I still can't get over that middle one.
Yeah, he's a unique looking giraffe.
It's amazing. It must have been amazing to see it in the wild.
Well, yeah, like I said, we see hundreds of giraffe a day, and sometimes we're going through the motions. But when we're doing this work, I work very closely with this one particular Ugandan Wildlife Authority ranger, and we're going through and we're doing the surveys and recording information about the giraffe. And we get to this one, and we both sort of look at each other as if to say, are our eyes deceiving us? Are we seeing the same thing? And then we got a little chuckle out of it because it was just so unexpected, and sort of this moment of cognitive dissonance where it's just a unique animal, not used to seeing something like this.
It does mess with your brain, but it is incredible. So here's a question for you.
Yeah.
You've sort of part answered it, but I just want to sort of reiterate. This is a deformity. It's not a transition. So it's not a transition to another species as yet. It's at the moment it's viewed as a deformity. Is that right?
Sure. Yeah. Well, we're actually now from this research, we've got put in touch with people who study types of skeletal dysplasias in humans as well, and we're looking on doing some genetic analysis to identify potentially some of the genes that are associated with it. So yes, we think it's likely due to some sort of skeletal disorder linked to the genes in the giraffe, to genetic mechanisms that change the development of cartilage or bone growth in these giraffe. You said it's not a separate species. That's true. This is a member of this particular population, but that's essentially how speciation works eventually, right? If this phenotype were to have some sort of advantage and is heritable, it could conceivably result in speciation over sort of a evolutionary time scale. But no, I would not classify that at this stage. It's sort of a one-off case in each of these populations.
Yeah, I mean, it is quite sort of remarkable. If you look back, it's I mean, I've only seen little bits of giraffe evolution, but if you look back at horse evolution, as well as how the body shape changes, it could be that in the future there might be some benefit to a giraffe, and that's, as you say, it's how evolution works. If there's some benefit to a giraffe being like that, that might be the future of giraffes. I won't be around to see it. I'm sure a lot of people won't be, but maybe that is the future giraffe. There's
some really interesting cases and evolutionary timescale called insular dwarfism. So a lot of animals, for instance, that let's say are separated from a mainland and go onto an island, large animals will sometimes get smaller. There's some really cool cases of dwarf elephants, because there may have been some sort of selective advantage of being a smaller body size, particularly on like a smaller environment with maybe limited resources. Again, that's not necessarily what's happening here, but yeah, body size is a trait that can be selected for. So there's some interesting cases that along sort of this evolutionary trajectory.
So people know that this is not, we haven't been having them on over the last few slides, and that it was actually photoshopped. Here's as much proof as you need.
Yeah, the contrast becomes really evident when you have the other giraffe behind them. It sort of paints the picture.
It's bizarre. Bizarre. I could watch it all day. I don't know how long it goes on for, but I'm going to watch it.
So yeah, there's still much to learn about giraffe, and that's one of the things that we're going to be continuing to do with the Giraffe Conservation Foundation, Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute, to try to develop some deeper understandings, one, so that we can have cool videos like this to look at, and two, so that we can have the best available information to design effective conservation strategy learn more about these incredible animals and how we can work with local communities to conserve them.
And as much as it grieves me, I am going to stop sharing because that is an amazing picture. And I'm sure everybody's sitting there going, no, don't get rid of that picture because it's just so good. But for now, I will stop sharing. That was amazing. I knew it was going to be because it was about giraffes. And
the giraffes tell themselves, oh yeah, no, I am under no illusions that the work I do is particularly interesting. I just happen to study an interesting animal.
No, it was brilliant. Thank you. Because I mean, I did throw some sort of curveballs at you there because, like all my interviews, you know, none of them are scripted. And I do tend to go off on tangents because, well, I get excited. But thoroughly enjoyable. I do think that at some stage, maybe we need to do something about the anatomy in more detail. Not asking you to dissect one. But yeah, I mean, because the anatomy, there's so much more to talk about with the anatomy of a giraffe. So maybe, you know, in a few months' time, maybe we'll get back together and talk about that.
Always happy to talk about giraffe, Alan. I'm always happy to talk about giraffe.
Excellent. And hopefully my listeners stayed with us right to the end. Right. Thanks ever so much for your time. It was brilliant. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope everybody else did. Thanks for watching. Thanks for your time. And I'll see you again. Take care.
Thanks, Alan.
Bye.